Hey guys, so as promised, here is the World War II review for your test. This is just what people have asked me to review, so if you have something else that you have a question on, please ask me. This is not the only thing that's going to be on your test. Please keep that in mind. And you'll see when we get to the important people, it is in no way all of the important people, it's just the ones who I've been asked about. All right, so this is on my website. You can find this slideshow for later if you would like to. I do recommend getting out your review sheets now and jotting things down or whatever you're writing on. And let's get started. So, the first thing we have is important people to know. It's before, during, and after the war. So there are a lot of people that you should kind of be familiar with. A lot of them we've gone over already: Stalin, FDR, all of those people, but a few that I was asked about. Let me move this over. So I was asked about Neville Chamberlain, who is the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Up until May of 1940, he ends up getting voted out when his party loses power. He's kind of important because he's part of appeasement, which is that issue that we had in the beginning before World War II even started. Appeasement is all about giving anybody, it could be a dictator or anyone in general, something that they want in order to avoid a conflict. So Neville Chamberlain is known for this, appeasing Hitler to avoid World War II. Obviously, we know that's not going to work, but we're going to talk more about his appeasement in just a minute. The next person that I was asked about was Winston Churchill. Churchill's the Prime Minister of Great Britain. You guys should know that because you know he's my favorite. I actually, in my office, I have a bobblehead of him up, like right across the way from here. You guys know that I love him. He is the Prime Minister of Great Britain through the war. A little bit after, actually, not at the end, he gets voted out and then he gets voted back in for a second one, and then that's the end of him. But he is there and he is a pretty important leader during this time. Then you've got Mussolini, who I was also asked about. Benito Mussolini is the fascist dictator of Italy before and during World War II. He's important to note. We know his fate is not going to be great. He ends up getting ripped out of his home. He was, I believe he was like in his room, like in bed. He gets ripped out of his home. They kill him, and then they as if that wasn't enough, they put him upside down in the town square, like by his toes, and they all shoot at him, and people spit on his body and all that stuff. So that's what happens when you're an evil dictator. Don't be one of them. All right, pre-war events. So the first thing, I gotta switch sides again, sorry. The good neighbor policy. So that is the foreign policy of FDR. We've spoken a lot about foreign policies. We talked about big stick diplomacy, dollar diplomacy, and moral diplomacy. This is kind of off of all of that. This is the good neighbor policy. It's designed to improve relations with Latin America. Things like dollar diplomacy and all of those, they were really set up to protect our interest in Latin America and where our money was. So this is a way for them to try and treat Latin America and the United States as equals. It's a good shot. It's trying to repair that damage that dollar diplomacy had done. And remember, too, we almost went to war with Mexico right before World War I. So that's another thing, too. It's trying to kind of repair those bonds that had been so fractured. The Munich Conference, it's held in September of 1938. It's between Neville Chamberlain and Hitler. France and Italy are there also, but Chamberlain and Hitler are the two bigger and more important people in this. So this basically allows Germany to annex, which means add on to Germany, the Sudetenland, which is part of Czechoslovakia. It borders Germany, so it's farther west in Czechoslovakia. And the whole thing with the Munich Conference is it says that Hitler has to promise that he'll take the Sudetenland, but nothing more, like leave Czechoslovakia alone. He promises that, and Neville Chamberlain makes this whole speech about how there'll be peace for our time, how Hitler is a man we can do business with, and basically says that he's trustworthy. We know for a fact that Hitler will go into Czechoslovakia and break that promise. This is where Neville Chamberlain kind of meets a lot of his downfall because he was so big into appeasement to try and avoid a Second World War. Great Britain was not in a place to be at war. Remember, they had spent a lot of money. They owed money back to America. It was kind of it was not looking great for them, and they knew that another war would really devastate them. We know it'll kind of bolster up their economy a bit, and we'll end up being allies with them. But at the time, everyone's trying to avoid another war because they had just gotten out of World War One. An Arsenal of Democracy is one of the titles of speeches that FDR gives. He basically says that the United States and Americans have to be an arsenal of democracy. An arsenal is where you keep weapons. So he says that we need to have like the weapons to defend democracy. And in order to do that, we have to give our own weaponry and ship them over to Europe, even though we are not involved in this war. This is December of 1940. So he's getting the American people ready to have what we call the Lend-Lease Acts. That'll happen in March of 41. He issues them where we will lend and lease weapons and money and other war materials to the Allied forces because it protects our democracy. So whatever protects our democracy will help. So this is him just kind of getting them used to the idea that like we're going to kind of abandon neutrality for a minute and help Europe. And by help Europe, we really mean Great Britain and France and the Allies to get rid of dictatorships. After that, this is in January 41, so it's not long after, he gives his 4 freedoms speech, and he's got 4 freedoms that he outlines. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And Norman Rockwell actually does like paintings based on these fears. So from left to right, you've got the 4 freedoms, right? Freedom of speech, worship, want, and from fear. And he's trying again to use this to get the American people on board, that we shouldn't have any fear in other nations. We shouldn't have fear of attack. We should be able to move forward. Again, this is all a way for him to kind of break away from neutrality and get the American people on board. The Atlantic Charter is August of 1941. Now remember, we are supposed to be neutral. And while we're lending and leasing money and weaponry to Great Britain, to anyone who's vital to our security, it's pretty clear that we're going to side with Great Britain if we do go into this war. So in August of 1941, FDR and Churchill meet in the middle of the Atlantic, and it's the Atlantic Charter that they create, and they're basically giving their goals for the end of World War II. So we have not officially joined this war yet, but they're saying moving forward, once this war is done, this is what we're going to change. And there's 8 main points to it. They mostly boil down to self-determination, right? We should remember that from World War I. Self-determination is the idea that nations can rule themselves and they won't be colonized or annexed onto other countries if they don't want to be. There are less restrictions on trade. They want more of an open economy so that you don't have as many economic issues. They want freedom of the seas and decreased arms in all nations, especially those who have been more aggressive, but everywhere. So we'll get there too. The home front. So the big thing with this is Victory Gardens. It's one of them. It's going to encourage Americans, also British people as well, to produce their own food so that this way you're buying less from a supermarket. The less food you're buying in a supermarket means the less they have to produce for the supermarkets and the more they can put over for the military. War bonds, if you bought a bond from the government, it would give them money to operate and function. And in a certain amount of time, you'll get that money back with interest. It really just depended on what kind of bond you got. I believe for World War II, it was a 10-year period where if you bought a bond, like a $100 bond, you would pay $50 or $75, and over time, usually 10 years, once it matured fully, you would get $100 back. So sometimes it would double, sometimes it just goes up a percentage. Today, I've told you guys that we have 30-year bonds. I told you how I have all these bonds and they're 30 years and I can't touch any of them because I'm 27. So now today's bonds are much different, but then they were a shorter period of time before you got your money back with interest. All right, recruitment of soldiers. Sorry, I keep having to switch myself around. There's 2 ways to do this. One is the draft or selective service. They're going to put conscription back, which we should remember from the Civil War. Conscription is when it's mandatory to go into the armed forces. So you'll get draft cards, and if your number gets called, you have to go into the army. There's also propaganda that evokes and encourages feelings of nationalism to your country, so you want to volunteer. The bulk of our soldiers come from volunteering. Korematsu versus the U.S. It's one of the big Supreme Court cases, right? We should remember SCOTUS means Supreme Court of the United States. Sorry, give me one second. I know it's, noon, but still need coffee. After Pearl Harbor, a lot of Japanese Americans are sent to internment camps. So these internment camps were places where they would go to live. It is not great. It is not good conditions that they are in. They are forced to leave their homes, their businesses, and everything else. They can't even take all of their possessions with them. They can only take, like, whatever they can fit in a certain amount of suitcases. And one guy, Fred Korematsu, he refuses to leave his home. He is from California, and he refuses to leave. And he gets tried for a crime because he broke the law. He was supposed to leave and he did not. And he ends up appealing it. He's found guilty, 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 and he brings it all the way to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, the Supreme Court says that during war, the internment of American citizens of Japanese descent was completely constitutional. Eventually, this will be overturned, but that's not until, Reagan? All right, so they've got like 40 years before they get any money from this. I believe they get like $20,000 each or something like that. It's really not a lot, and I could be wrong. Look it up. So sorry. But yeah, so they're going to get some money back if they're still living, but it's not at all anything like it should be. And the last thing that I was asked about were World War II battles. So the first one that I was asked about was the Battle of Stalingrad. This is from August 1942 to February 1943, which we know is winter in Russia because, it gets cold quick. Obviously in August it's not winter, but February is pretty cold. During this battle, it ends up getting to -40 degrees. So it's pretty cold. Stalingrad is a major city at this point. Obviously, it's named after Stalin, their leader. So it would be a big attack, like to crush the morale of the Soviets. So Germany goes in. It's the largest confrontation of World War II. And Germany goes into the Soviet Union for Stalingrad. Civilians are kept there. Stalin thinks that will help people to work harder to win the city. It starves them out instead, and you have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people who end up dead. The city's completely torn apart, soldiers are fighting, and it looks like the Soviets are going to lose, and then all of a sudden the temperature drops -40, and we know winter in Russia is never a good time to be there, and the Germans ultimately will lose, but the question is at what cost, right? Like the Allied wins, but at what cost? So many people are dead, the city is destroyed, but it maintains morale in the Soviets, and it keeps them moving forward. And the last thing that you guys asked for was the Battle of the Bulge. So this is the last major offensive for Hitler. It's December 1944, I believe the 16th through January 25th, 1945. So it's about 6 weeks long. And this is the last major German offensive campaign on the Western Front during the war. They're going through the Ardennes Forest, which is actually the first place that Germany went through to get into France when they take Paris. It's in Belgium, and it's not guarded very well. The battle is the largest and bloodiest single battle fought by the United States in World War II. It's the third deadliest campaign in American history. It is an Allied victory, and this marks an early end, like one of the earlier markers for the end of World War II. So that's it. If you guys have any more questions, please ask me. Your test is Wednesday, so make sure you guys are ready for that. If you have more questions, please ask. I miss you all so much, and I will be posting another video later giving you your assignments for the week. All right, have a good one, guys.